guys, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to talk about life. And today we're talking about a very heavy subject, but it's also a subject that needs to be talked about more so there's more awareness about it. And we're talking about human trafficking. And I'm joined by the author of It's Not About the Sex. And this is such a great book, John. Thank you so much first for writing it, and thank you for coming on. So before we get into talking about this book, let's talk about who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So this is my second book. I spent most of my career as a professional accountant and finance person, and went into semi-retirement and really kind of wanted to pursue my passion of writing. And my first book was about police officers. And when I was interviewing one of the police officers, I asked some questions at the end, easy questions, such as, what would you do if you won the lottery? And he said, I'd quit my job and hunt down human traffickers. And when he said that, I knew I had my next book in mind.
So you're a CPA. You said you always wanted to write. So how did that go? You know, because that's normally when you think CPA, you think numbers, a numbers person, not a creativity person.
Yeah, I don't like to always say that I'm a finance person because they think if you know numbers, you don't know words. But I was always interested in writing and the creative process, and thought about it doing that when I was young, but realized the chances of being the next John Grisham were pretty small, so I better use that accounting degree.
Yeah, but this book is so unique because it's written from four perspectives of the human law enforcement officer, a survivor, a brothel madam, and an advocate. Why did you decide to show those four different perspectives?
Yeah, I wanted to hit on this issue and really give different, very different perspectives, and kind of reveal a lot of the misperceptions that are out there. I think I wrote this for the non-expert, which is where I considered myself a year and a half ago. Somebody who had maybe seen a headline or two, but didn't really understand what was going on. And I wanted to give some people a voice, and especially the survivors, and letting those who are combating human trafficking to have a voice and to show their perspective, and write it in such a way that it reads like a fast-paced fiction novel. So you're learning things without even realizing it. It's not a report, it's not a documentary. So I've taken those facts and figures and turned it into a plot line.
And I will say that it's such a heavy subject that I did read it all, but I had to take it in little chunks because some of the scenes that you describe in the book, it's just like you cannot believe it's happened to another person.
Yeah, and it's all real. It's not sensationalized. It's not graphic, but it is all from case files and testimony. So it is something very real that people need to hear about. But I try to do it in a way that you're going to want to turn the page and find out what happens next, like in a regular novel.
So where did you go about finding the people to highlight in your book?
Well, it was a variety. Some of them were referrals from other people. I would contact some nonprofits and just various individuals, and got turned down. Some people just didn't want to tell their story. But some of it was also just kind of cold calling and just telling people what I wanted to do, and gauging that interest level, and it just led from there.
Because honestly, you would think with a brothel madam and a survivor wouldn't want to actually tell their story, but I can see why they would want to because they want to put the awareness out there to help others get away from that kind of life.
Yeah. Well, and it was the right time for them. I think if I had talked to them 5 years ago, they probably wouldn't have wanted to have that story told. But they were ready to, um, make sure that the public knew what they had been through, and be able to connect with other people in such a way that may have had a similar experience.
What was the most shocking thing that you learned while you were doing this novel?
I think I was surprised at just how much it happens more than people think, and the fact that it's happening in small town suburban America, especially when some of the kids are still in high school, still living at home. And that was a surprise to me. And so that's why I focused on small town America, not the border or big cities where it's definitely happening there. But I think people are surprised to find out it happens in those nice communities. And it happens to kids who initially think are at risk. I mean, a lot of people, and it's true, if you're a runaway, you're definitely more vulnerable for lots of things. Um, than the average person. But I wanted to focus on those people who were kind of seemingly living a normal life, and how they could get trapped into that kind of situation.
Yeah, I love how you rebuke the myth of the scary guy in the van that's going to take you and put you into the trafficking, because that's not what's happening now. Let's talk about some of the signs of how we can tell someone's being trafficked.
Sure, yeah, and you're right. Kidnapping is only about 5%, so it isn't that person snatch off the corner. And some of those grooming signs. I have in the back of my book a tips for parents section. And some of those grooming signs are things like a second cell phone or unexplained gifts, such as new clothes, new jewelry. If that looks strange to you or surprising to you as a parent, that's when you need to start asking questions. And it may not be your kid, but it could be one of your kids' friends, someone on their soccer team, or that quiet kid in the back of the classroom. And those are times when you need to kind of really start asking questions.
I will say one of the things that really shook me to the core is because I was listening to it as I was working was, and I can't find it in the book now, but about the use of the word rescue and freedom, that connotates something totally different for someone, a victim.
Yeah, so that was something that was explained to me by Angela Clark, who is in my book as the survivor. And she was trafficked by a family member at a young age, about 5 years old, and she is now in her 50s. And I look at that story as yes, it's very traumatic as something that happens to you as a child, but her story is really one of healing and recovery and decades worth of working on yourself. What works, what doesn't work, and I think a lot of readers could resonate with that, because we all have different issues, and it may not be trafficking, but you can see Angela struggle uh, and go back and forth, and as a survivor, and a survivor for decades, she didn't really like some of the words out there, like saving and rescue, because it implies that she's not in control of her own destiny, and she's not able to write her own story, and kind of get her own inner strength. And I think her story is really one of, how does someone persevere in the face of adversity, right? It's because you think about it, how does somebody go through what she did at 5 years old and still is here today to tell me, a total stranger, her story? And she let me use journals, diaries, etc., which she used a lot in therapy. And I think the reader will really get to know her as a person and see her internal fortitude to kind of fight through those internal demons. And I think that's kind of the theme of her story, more than the horrors of what happened to her as a child.
Yeah, because in her story, I really remember is the fact she couldn't even remember what happened to her. That she had to
Yeah,
go
a
to the
lot of suppressed memories.
hmm
Yeah, and that's common when especially in a childhood trauma, that you have these suppressed memories, and she didn't find out a lot of this stuff into late adulthood, and just trying to deal with that. I can't imagine having memories come back from my childhood that are just so horrific, and just the way that she was able to fight through that shows her internal willpower.
I love that. Do you have your book with you, by the way?
I do.
Okay, we're going to take a brief commercial break, but when we come back, are you going to ready to read an excerpt for me?
Sure.
All right, so here's the commercial.
Hi, my name is Joanna, and I would like to share with you a little bit about Shores of Grace, Shores Philly. It's a ministry located in Philadelphia. The portion of Shores that I volunteer for goes into Kensington, an area greatly impacted by homelessness and addiction. And we go and we take love, food, clothing, snacks, conversation. We believe that it is a way that we can meet people right where they are and show them the love of Jesus. We have seen lives changed in big ways and in small ways, and we have built wonderful relationships with the people in the community. We have big plans, more we'd like to do, and we would appreciate any support, either through prayer or through donation. If you would like to donate, you can go to shoresofgrace.com, and in the menu, click on Donate. And we just ask that you put Philly in your donation comments. Thank you.
And we are back talking about human trafficking and the book It's Not About the Sex, which I highly recommend. John, before the break, you said you would read an excerpt from your book, so take it away.
Yeah, let me kind of set up the scene here. So one of the things I wanted to accomplish with this book was to answer the question that I had and I always get when I talk to people, which is, how does this happen and why can't they get out? And so I'm going to go to my law enforcement chapter, chapter 2, which is a situation with a mother and daughter where the criminals are trying to play fear off each other, and they want to do something dramatic to kind of get compliance with the mother and daughter. And so they've been groomed for a little while, and now the tables are starting to turn, where the older boyfriend isn't really caring. He actually has been working on them for a while. So that's the scene that we're setting here. So the first thing Cassie noticed was that the place was grungy, dirty, and full of fast food wrappers thrown about in random places. But the worst part about it was the smell. She couldn't quite figure out what it was. Could it be dusty, smoky, moldy, or food going bad? Had it been cleaned? Ever? Cassie's simple description of Rico's house was that it was gross. This way, instructed Rico to Erlinda and Cassie without so much as a friendly greeting. He grabbed both of their cell phones and quickly ushered them into a bedroom with a not so gentle shove. The small bedroom contained a full size bed and a dresser, and Cassie noticed that the room's only window was boarded up. It contained one small lamp casting shadows throughout the room. The gloomy room increased the fear growing in the pit of Cassie's stomach. Why would Rico board up the window? She casually walked towards the window to get a closer inspection. She tried tugging on one of the wooden boards, but it didn't budge. They were screwed in tight and blocked any outside light. There was no way out of that room, and a sense of dread came over Cassie. That dread turned into panic when she heard the deadbolt close behind her. And then another one, and then another one. Cassie turned around to look at the bedroom door and heard the last of the four deadbolts locking from the other side. Her fear level doubled. She desperately looked at her mother for some reassurance and comfort, but instead, it was like looking in a mirror. Her mom's face was overflowing with fear. Mom, what's going on? Cassie asked with an unsteady voice. I don't know. I'm sorry I got you into this, Erlinda answered and started to cry. I'm scared. What are they going to do? She asked, and stepped towards her mother, and they embraced, trying to comfort one another, both hoping that the evening would magically get better. Neither one had any idea that in exactly 18 minutes their lives would be changed forever.
Wow. I mean, that right there, that particular story really like shook me because you have a mom who's trying the best for her daughter and thinking she's doing everything and has this really loving boyfriend. And then all of a sudden he just turns on a dime on her.
Yeah, and talking to the law enforcement officer, that is common that these Romeo style pimps can work on somebody for a long time. And they're looking for vulnerabilities. And ultimately, that's going to be what they consider a more easy prey, whether that's a runaway, whether that's a single mom, somebody who is desperate for something, and they try to exploit that in order to get what they want.
And you also had another mother daughter one later on in the book with the Brothel Madam, when she was doing the pornography, where the mom was trying to get money to pay the bills, and she was kind of pushing her daughter into it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe when Jessica told me that story, and how she was there at this essentially like a sign up table, like you would, you know, going to something like signing up to be a volunteer, at church for something. And when she said that that was common, that was part of the financial crash of 2008. A lot of people were losing their homes, etc. But still, that's a desperate way to try to make money, and you really land up just selling your soul to the devil. And and when the mom brings you, it just seemed much more heartbreaking than just some random girl just coming to sign up to be in the life of pornography. And once she does, her life is never the same. And once she enters that life, things happen very quickly that change her.
Yeah, I've just, like I said, it's really eye opening, but it's a very deep subject. How long did it take you to write this book? Because I know you had to go through a lot of journals and had to do a lot of research. So how long did it take you?
About a year.
Was there times where you just had to say, okay, I got to stop and take a mental break because this stuff is so heavy?
A little bit, yeah. I really tried to focus on what the chapter was trying to do, what the purpose of the chapter was trying to show, and trying to be authentic. Um, and there was a lot of going back and forth with the people that I profiled. So they got to, make changes and be part of the editing process. It wasn't just an interview and then I leave and come back with a book. It was very interactive. So I felt like, we were going back and forth with that. And I think that helped kind of break things up a little bit, because it's not like you can just, crank out a whole chapter in just a couple days. It's a back and forth process. And I really thought hard about what was I trying to reveal in this chapter for the reader. And when you're interviewing somebody like that and you're writing their stories up, you're literally putting words in their mouth and thoughts in their head. And I wanted to try to be authentic as possible, and that's why it was a collaborative effort.
I love how you just said that you gave them the control to edit as well. And I think we just lost him for a moment. Let's see if he comes back. I'm going to go to another commercial. Oh, you're back. Can you hear me now?
Yep, a little technical difficulty.
Yeah. So I love how you were talking about how you gave them the final edit, basically, to be able to look and gave them the power to tell their own story, because some other authors would take it and kind of like sensationalize it, but you wanted to make sure they felt comfortable with what you were writing. And how much did that mean to these people that you profiled?
Well, I think it meant a lot, because they put their trust in me to tell their story. Especially, I would say this, Angela, the survivor, and Jessica, the brothel madam. To me, that was a more sensitive subject, and definitely I worked more often with them than the law enforcement officer or the advocate. And especially the survivor, Angela, she really wanted to make sure it was an authentic survivor story. And in the survivor community, a lot of them feel like they don't have authentic stories out there. People could misquote them or use their picture or something like that with in a different context that might surprise them. And so there was a lot of time spent, and I think that they really appreciated, that they had such a good say in it. It was my book, but it was their story.
I love how you were just talking about, and it reminded me of part of the book when you were talking with the advocate who had some volunteers that were trying to help these girls, and one of the volunteers just kind of blasted the girl on social media.
Yeah, when I was talking with Janelle, the advocate, she was talking about how when she first started the nonprofit, of course, you're looking for help, you're looking for money, and you're excited when someone wants to volunteer. But this is these these, especially the teens, have gone through such a traumatic experience. And it's not just one-time trauma. We're talking about day after day, multiple times a day, in many instances. And so there's a certain level of sensitivity that you have to understand, and it's different from other nonprofits. And when Janelle told me the story of her volunteer that just turned out to be a nightmare, I wanted to put that in there that it takes a special person to really work with somebody who's gone through that trauma. I know myself, that's not something that I feel like I would be capable of doing, to sit down with somebody regularly and really help them through that. Um, but it was a piece that we wanted to show that that not every volunteer is hopeful.
So that brings me to the point, to the word trust, because you have to gain their trust before they even open up to you. So how did you gain the trust of the 4 people that you profiled?
Well, part of it was by having a previous book. I could at least say that I was a legitimate author, and those the people I profiled in the previous book, it was a similar style. It was telling their stories. It was having them express what was an important incident in their life, and that's what I wrote up. And so it was, uh, talking to them about the process, but ultimately they had to make a leap of faith to ensure that I was going to be true to what they were telling me. And I think it worked out really well that they got to have a chance to look at everything, and we went back several times. But yeah, it's definitely a trust. And as I go through into my next book, it'll be the same thing. I will be able to point to this body of work and to say, hey, look, this is what I've done. If you want to talk to these people, you can go talk to them, and you can see that I'm going to try to be as authentic as possible.
So you mentioned a next book. What are you working on now?
Yeah, so with the human trafficking book, I also wanted to do that book because I felt like it was one of the most evil things that somebody can do to another person. And so I've not backed off the serious subject. So my next book is going to be about profiling people who are fighting evil. And so, for example, I've already interviewed an undercover police officer who poses as a 13-year-old girl online and then goes and arrests these guys at the motel. So I figured that was a pretty straightforward example of evil. Anybody who tries to exploit a 13-year-old is pretty bad. So that's the theme that I'm going with is people who are fighting evil.
So basically, from what I'm hearing from you, is that your first book, you wrote your first book about police officers, and they talked about human trafficking. You're like, oh, that's my idea for the second book, and now you have the second book, and now you're talking about people fighting evil. So your books are kind of, you're getting the idea for your next book from the book that you currently write, correct?
Correct. And I've only got one person identified for this chapter. So for me, it'll be an interesting journey of, again, how do I find the people? How do I find somebody who also wants to tell their story? I mean, I had police officers turn me down. I've had other people for the trafficking book turn me down. So you also have to find somebody who is willing to talk, willing to give you details. And so it'll be an interesting journey to find the rest of the people for that book.
When do you think that one will be out? Because you're saying you only found one person. How long do you think you'll proceed writing it before you say, okay, I'm going to put it aside for a while and start something else if you don't get all the people?
Yeah, I'm shooting for the end of the summer next year. So yeah, I've already started it, and so I think it'll be about that year-long process.
So from the time you start writing the book to the time you go through editing and interviewing all these people, and you decide to publish, do you self-publish or do you go through a publisher?
So for my trafficking book, it was self-published. I did hire a publishing consultant that helped me with a website and the cover and some of the non-writing pieces of the publishing process, and that's probably what I'll do again for the third book. It's very hard to find publishers who will just take you on as a client. But the good news is that in today's modern technology world, you can easily self-publish, and that's probably what I'll end up doing, unless of course you know a publisher that you can recommend.
Let's go back to the human trafficking. It's such a powerful message. Did you ever think about I just lost my train of thought. Have you ever thought about maybe just doing excerpts here and there for different people? Because for me, it was like I said, it was so heavy for me that I would read it or listen to it, and then I said, okay, I had to take a break. Especially when you talk about the mother and daughter, the one at the very beginning when
Right.
you read an excerpt from the book of what happened to them at the end. It's just like, oh wow, how was that described to you?
Well, the law enforcement officer kind of went through several cases that he worked on, and that was one of the things that was in there. And so, in order to kind of protect the guilty as well as the innocent, I took several case files and sort of put together one story. So the plot line would make sense, but it still reveals things that came out of the case files. And so that was my process.
Yeah, because to me, I was trying to figure out how you knew exactly what happened to the mother and the daughter when they weren't alive anymore. How did you know exactly? Now that makes more sense that you took it and you kind of put it together.
Yeah, and part of it is for example, the law enforcement officer would describe to me who these criminals are, what they're like, um, what they were doing beforehand, what they've done afterwards, if they got away or if they got caught, etc. And so, based upon some of those profiles, I was able to put together these characters. So you're not going to find a real person named Rico if you were to try to search, Colorado criminal records, and but you try to build these characters so you as the reader can understand what they're doing, who they are, and hopefully not like them at all because clearly they're the bad guy. And so, but you have to give them personality and context, and not just say, well, here's this bad guy and he's doing bad things. Otherwise, I don't think that makes for a good book.
Do you still keep in contact with the people that you wrote the profiles on?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Angela and I did a joint presentation about human trafficking in her hometown. She lives here in Colorado, and so it was great to have a discussion with her and be able to talk to the audience and talk about her story and have her right there as well to answer questions and things like that. So that was a great opportunity. She's been on some interviews with me based on her schedule. So yeah, I've had contact.
What would you want people to know about human trafficking? That's the most important thing you would think. Because I know there's a lot of nuances with it, but what's the most important thing?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that it does cut across any racial, socioeconomic, gender, et cetera, lines, and anybody can fall victim. And probably the biggest key is, if you take away the most vulnerable group, say someone who's a runaway or is ignored in the foster system, and you have these kids in high school, there's a lot of grooming that's being done online. And I think a lot of parents don't realize that there's predators online. StaySafe.org estimates there's 750,000 predators online at any given time. And they may be looking for all kinds of nefarious things. Human trafficking might be one of them. And so you're kind of seeing this merging of, sexual abuse, pornography, and human trafficking kind of merging into one thing because of the technology that we have. And if you ever read articles in the paper about how someone gets arrested, a lot of times they have video footage, they've seen things posted on the internet. And so uh, parents really need to be aware of the perils that are out there. And it's a different world than when they grew up. And certainly when I grew up, the stranger danger is now digitized because Wi-Fi is the great equalizer. You know, you could be sitting at your kitchen table while mom is making dinner, and the predator's literally in your pocket, in your phone, and you're not as safe, as you think you are. And so parents need to be aware of that.
So what do you think parents should do? Limit the time on internet, or
Yeah, I think they need to limit the time. They need to be reviewing what's on their kids' phones, and whether the kid is 10 or 17, what chat rooms are they in? Because all these games, all these apps, all these social media programs have private messaging and et cetera. And that's where a lot of that grooming takes place. It takes place through those private chats. And they really need to know what apps are on their phone. You know, there are some parental controls out there, but those are guardrails. They're not fail safe. And you can't just look once. I recommend to people that they look once a week, and they are the ones who approve any kind of new application that's being downloaded. Because a lot of these, even places like Snapchat, which is a very popular program for teens, there's there's a my eyes only secret hidden folder in there. So the parent might be looking at Snapchat stories and, oh, they look fine. It was, whatever, scenes from the volleyball game. But then there's these hidden folders that they may not be aware of. And so, they really need to be on top of things because the predators are out there, and your child might not be looking for trouble, but trouble's looking for them. I guarantee it.
I love how you commented, you said about the little hidden things with inside Snapchat, and there's also inside video games as well, because I've seen it on some of the TV shows that people can get in and have a separate chat, or have messages sent through video
Right.
games as well.
Absolutely, and that was one of the storylines in the book, was a girl who got groomed through a video game, and that's very common, and so there's just there's new apps every day, and so it's way too easy for the predators, and they're just gonna try 100 times and hope for some kind of reaction, and whoever reacts, that's what they're going to zoom in on.
I also love the fact that in the back of the book you have all these reference points. I'm just going to read some of them. Like learn about the truth, and you have a training that you can go to, report suspicious behavior. You talk about recognizing the signs, the physical, mental, and behavioral. And I love the fact that you put all three of those, because sometimes if you see one sign, you may not see the other signs.
Yeah, absolutely, and it may be an indicator of something else. It may not be human trafficking. It could be a domestic violence situation, or just something that's happening in the home. So there's all kinds of signs that are red flags. They may lead to different things. So people just need to be aware of it. You can't solve a problem that you're not aware of, and so that's why I wanted to put those things in the back of the book, and to be a compassionate observer. And you don't want to approach somebody if there's a pimp nearby, because those are criminals. They're very dangerous, and they have no value for life. And so, but you can make phone calls, you can text, if someone's alone, you can ask, do you need help? Is there someone I can call? You can be that compassionate person out there to try to help.
Why do you think that there's so much awareness now about human trafficking than there was in the past? Because in the past, you barely ever heard about it.
Yeah, there's definitely more advocates. There are um, more stories out there, and I'm not sure if it's happening more or not. I think when I asked the law enforcement officer, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And he said generally it's hard to tell, but he thinks it's getting worse. And he said in the Denver metro area, they work on about 100 cases a year, and he estimated there's 1,000 out there. So that means they're only scratching the surface of 10%. You know, uh, you've got issues on the border, you've got issues in big cities, and so um, law enforcement is getting better trained. You know, medical staff, people in schools are getting better trained, but there's a long way to go to try to combat this. And you know, unfortunately, uh, the internet has not helped. The pandemic has not helped. I mean, what happened to kids in the last couple years? They went out of the classroom, went home, worked online, had no social interaction. So where did they try to find that social interaction? Online. The predators loved chaos over the last 2 years.
Wow. Do you think also too it could be because those that were part of the human trafficking that have been trafficked are speaking up and telling their stories to make people more aware of what's going on?
Yeah, definitely. I think survivors are getting more of a voice, and it's building momentum for them to be heard. And whether that's, you know, just less of a taboo, or the Me Too movement, or whatnot, survivors are feeling stronger, and I think that's, you know, that's starting to show. And so that's a good thing, that their voice is getting out there, and people should be aware of what's going on so they can, you know, prevent it as much as they can in their own families.
Yeah, because a lot of times when you think about a human trafficking, you don't think about the person that's been trafficked. There's so much shame placed upon the person that's been trafficked, and that you want to release them from having that shame.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the only way to um, get through that is to confront it. And you know, somebody who's a victim has nothing to be ashamed of. And a lot of these organizations are trying to move them from victim to survivor. And when you view yourself as a survivor, your mindset changes. And and so that's really where we want to get these folks to get to, is to look at themselves as survivors, and they can get through this. They can pursue dreams and goals, and et cetera, just like anybody else. And you know, a lot of that's talked about, you know, in Angela's story. She's, you know, as a featured survivor, and part of that is, you know, just realizing that her trauma isn't what defines her. And when you finally believe that deep in your heart, in your head, you know, everywhere, that's when you really um, can live your life authentically.
I'm glad you mentioned Angela again because I think her story was the most powerful because she didn't know what was wrong. I mean, it started when she was 5 years old and going on. When she got older, it was so buried, so suppressed that she didn't know, and there was so much going on in her life that she couldn't put it into words till she finally went into therapy and got and realized what had happened to her. But her story is so powerful. She could have easily have just held her story in, but she went and she's helping others. She's advocating to make sure that other people aren't trafficked.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she's done TED Talks on the subject, and I think it was not only powerful for the audience, but I think it was very empowering for her as well. And you know, and just having her tell her story, um, you know, has an impact all around.
John, our time is almost up, but before our time is up, before we get into where people can find the book and where they can find more about you, is there one little last nugget that you want to share with people?
Sure. So one of the tips that I like to tell parents is that is an old school tip, which is teach your child to memorize phone numbers. You know, when I was a kid, I knew many phone numbers. Then it became speed dialed 1, 2, and 3. Now it's all on your smartphone in a contact database. Nobody knows any phone numbers. And if your kid is in real trouble, whether their battery's dead or whatever, they need to know several adults' phone numbers, and it's just an old school recommendation that that could prove valuable sometime in the future.
I so agree, because even now I don't even know some of the numbers that I have to look up sometimes. Okay, what's their number again? So I agree with that. So
Exactly. It's so true.
the book is, it's not about the sex, and it's about the true stories of human trafficking from a law enforcement officer, a survivor, a brothel madam, and an advocate. John, where can they find this book at?
Yeah, if somebody would like a signed copy from me, they can go to my website, which is www.itisnotabout.com. It is selling on Amazon, and they would also have a Kindle and an audio version of the book. So that's available too. And anybody can, who's got an Amazon account can get that. And I suggest looking at one of those two places.
And I know you said you have another book that you're writing right now, and I would love for you to come back on. I would love to read the other book. I also would love to read the one about police officers, because I'm a daughter of a former police officer. My dad served so many years. He was a chief police, a deputy sheriff, so I totally would understand that. But I would love for you to come back on and talk about the book that you're currently writing once it's out in the public.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely keep you posted. And I'd love to send you a copy of the police book, and we can maybe chat about that sometime.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people give cops the bad rap because the only ones that you ever see are the ones that are doing the bad things.
Yeah, I mean, that whole book was what I call the human side of policing, and getting to know that officer as a person, and why was a day extraordinary to them, even though it might not look all that exciting in a case file.
Yeah, that's so true. So, John, thank you for coming on and for sharing about um, writing the book, first of all, and sharing the profiles of these people that human trafficking has affected, because this is a powerful book, guys. I'm telling you, I cannot recommend this book more. I think this opened my eyes. I even had conversations with my 20-year-old daughter about this book one day. We're riding down the road, we were talking about it. So it will open up a conversation for parents as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate being on the show, and great conversation.
All right, guys, we will see you on the next chat from the blog cabin. I will put in the download all the information about where you can find the book, where you can find John, also some facts about human trafficking that John so happily shared in the back, so that way you know some of the signs, and I'll put some resources as well. So, as always, be blessed and keep chatting. Bye.